Well, good evening, friends, colleagues, students, and other guests. It's really wonderful to be at the GSB for this inaugural lecture this evening. I'm Professor Sue Harrison. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research and Internationalization and currently acting Vice-Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, while Professor Mamakete Pakeng is on sabbatical leave. So on behalf of the university, I welcome you to this Vice-Chancellor's inaugural lecture, where Professor Linda Ronnie will speak on Women in Academia, Thriving or Surviving. And just before I go any further, we are in load shedding, and we will come out of load shedding shortly, we hope. The lights will go off, the lights will hopefully come on again, so please don't be worried about it. So inaugural lectures are a central part of UCT's academic life. I said it just in time. And that was very quick. GSB is organized. Inaugural lectures are a very central part of UCT's academic life and the rite of passage of our academics. They commemorate their appointment to full professorship and all the hard work that has brought them to this point. And they provide an opportunity for the professor to share their research beyond UCT in a way that's accessible to the general public. One very special highlight of the inaugural lecture is that it's also an opportunity for the loved ones of the professor delivering the lecture to attend. And we know how important the support of our friends and family is in achieving this important milestone and the demands of academic life. And so I offer particular welcome to each of you who has encouraged and provided support to Professor Ronnie on her climb of the academic ladder. I will now introduce the members of the platform party. Professor Suki Goodman is the Dean of the Faculty of Commerce, and she will introduce our speaker. Professor Linda Ronnie in the middle will deliver the inaugural lecture. Associate Professor Nomusa Makuba is the Deputy Dean of Transformation in the Faculty of Humanities, and she will deliver the vote of thanks. And also attending from the executive is Professor Elawani Ramagondo, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Transformation, Student Affairs and Social Responsiveness. Thanks for being here. I'd like to offer a little bit of context for Professor Ronnie's lecture, without, of course, anticipating the insights that she'll offer of her research. So any woman who's pursuing an academic career will tell you that her progress is made much more difficult on one detail, her gender. UCT provides extensive career support for all our rising academics, and it's important that our commitment to transformation, we also focus on providing career support to academics of previously marginalized groups. This includes women academics, and especially Black women academics and women academics in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Gender inequality and bias, especially in the STEM fields, is well documented. In 2020, the World Economic Forum said that fewer than 1/3 of female students choose to study higher education courses in the subjects of the STEM fields. Women working in STEM fields also publish less and sometimes receive less pay, although this was dealt with at UCT way back when I was still quite a junior researcher, so I hope we've got it right at UCT. According to UNESCO Institute of Statistics, just 30% of the world's researchers are women. And South Africa has a higher than the global average rate at just over 45% of our researchers being women, according to the 2019 Women in Science online report. But gender bias intersects with other factors, and as a result, the Department of Higher Education, Science and Innovation found in 2020 that Black women academics were the most underrepresented group in the sector at 16.1%. It is significant that the bulk of these statistics were gathered just before, or either before or just after the onset of the COVID pandemic. And the early results on the effects of the pandemic on global productivity in the workplace showed that in general, women suffered a greater setback than men in terms of productivity and career advancement, and that women academics displayed a significant drop-off in the publication of articles and manuscripts. The issue is a pressing one in higher education around the world, and we are living in a time when humanity is dealing with change on a global scale, including climate development, energy, food security, the green economy, and decarbonization, building a healthy world, human migration, diversity and inclusion, and innovations of the fourth industrial revolution and artificial intelligence, to name just a few. So the world cannot afford to do without the perspectives and the experiences of its marginalized people, including those of us in the global south and those of us who are women. Professor Ronnie's research offers much needed insight into the relationship of women academics and the institutions where they work, the patterns of change in the relationship over the last 10 years, and the likely effects that change, especially with regard to the pandemic. So we look forward to hearing further insights on women in academia from Professor Ronnie, and I now call on Professor Goodman to introduce her. Thank you.
Good evening, Acting Vice-Chancellor, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, colleagues, family, and friends. An inaugural lecture provides us a key opportunity to take what we do in our tightly focused academic world and lay it out for open access, to account for the hours we spend in empirical study, to platform our relevance and applicability in the everyday. In the Faculty of Commerce, some of us try to predict and mitigate financial risk. Some of us analyze the social and economic relationships that underpin society. Others of us design and build the knowledge and information systems that give order to our lives. Some of us model behaviors that explain our consumption and also our compulsions. And then there are those of us who try to understand the mystery of the human being at the center of this often weird and sometimes wild working world. The study of how we think, feel, and behave in order to discover ways that take us forward and make us whole. Professor Linda Ronnie's life and academic work has been squarely centered in enhancing the human experience of and with work, learning as much as she can about crafting a good life in work organizations, thinking about and writing about what constitutes a healthy psychological contract, more than the money, the benefits, and the status, the unquantifiable leadership fairy dust that can make or break. Underlying almost all of Linda's work in organizational behavior is the theme of promoting an ethic of care, and the many ways this ethic weaves together the basic units of analyses: the individual, the group, the organization, and society. Linda has occupied management roles in a variety of spaces. Spending time in industries like manufacturing laid the foundation for both her research and her academic interests, and the strength and the skill to take on leadership positions at UCT. For much of Linda's academic career, she held the renown of distinguished teacher, her inherent gift for stimulating deep learning, for making it real by keeping it real. Linda has made significant contributions to knowledge in her field of research. Involved in several major research projects, she attained her PhD in 2008 at the University of Cape Town and completed 2 master's dissertations at 2 different universities in the United Kingdom. Linda successfully combined management practice and teaching with her research. This allows her to contextualize her work in the South African context and thus supports the generation of knowledge from the global South in management science. Linda's teaching is research-led and case study-driven. The fact that one of her own case studies is among the top 10 most downloaded cases from the peer-reviewed Emerald Emerging Markets Case Studies portfolio speaks to her scholarly contribution and the relevance of her work. Linda was prolific during her tenure as Dean of the Commerce Faculty, generating an average of almost 5 publications per year while simultaneously holding the faculty's leadership role. Her energy for other people has made her a mentor for many in multiple domains: research, teaching, and management. The School of Management Studies is fortunate to house her as senior research scholar for her sustained research output, but also for the role she plays in mentoring the next generation of researchers in her field. A standout feature of Linda's academic career is that she embodies the theory she has contributed to building. In her role as Dean of the Faculty, she personified authentic leadership. She led from the front, walked the talk, and of her many leadership gifts, hearing and holding everyone's story defines her as an archetypal scientist practitioner, weaving a golden integrated thread of who she is, how she thinks, and what she professes. Without diminishing the indictment of how long it took to come to pass, the triumph of being the very first woman of color professor in the Faculty of Commerce at UCT merits a mention tonight as we invite Professor Linda Ronnie to deliver her inaugural lecture. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm not very good at ceremonious kind of things, but I'll not forget to say, thank you, Suki, for the reminder, gentle as it was, of welcoming the acting VC, the DVC, and colleagues and friends. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here with me. Yeah, everybody was asking if I was nervous, but I'm not, and I'll tell you why. I'm nervous in a different way. I think I'm going to start with thanking people because I didn't get here by myself. I think that's, we all the sum of everyone else. So I want to think about people who aren't here with us anymore. And the first person I want to think about is Colin Furter, Professor Colin Furter, who was the Professor of Finance here at the GSB, who's unfortunately, of course, I was going to say, how do you fortunately die of anything? But unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But he is, because I wear his gown, and I wear it with great pride. And then Kate Hunter, our most brilliant librarian, a good friend, and another one taken from us far too soon. My parents and my parents-in-law, who no longer with us, but I think would be quite pleased with seeing me here. And then, of course, my family, one must say, the husband, and my lovely children, who didn't, I think, always get the best of me, because it takes a lot, and it takes a lot out of one's home life to succeed in academia. I also definitely want to thank my broader family, the one I come from. Yeah, I think they're all quite surprised that it's me here. But I do especially want to thank my sister Julia, because she's always believed in me and always had my back, even when I didn't have those beliefs about myself. So Jules, thank you, you rock. Then to my besties, Talita and Lynn, thank you so much for also being there and listening to my 1,000 explanations, Lynn especially, of my methodological difficulties that I was having. Thank goodness, choose your besties wisely. They're both academics, so that went a bit smoother. Okay. And then I want to thank my colleagues. I definitely want to thank the Dean's Advisory Committee when I was the Dean. So it's such a pleasure to see everyone here. I appreciate my deputy deans, my heads of department, my finance manager, my IT person, my transformation person, and who would be anywhere without the HR person. So I want to thank them for affording me possibly the best experience of my working life. I learned what it was like to lead a team where there was collaboration, there was commitment, and there was care for one another. And yeah, I'll never forget it. It was just, when I left the deanship, I felt life could end professionally, and I'd be very, very happy still. I also, of course, want to thank Frida, the fierce PA, who kind of managed my time so well and said, no. I'll carve out little bits for you because you must get on with the real work of being a researcher. And I think it was nice to hear, Suki, my output during the deanship, because I did feel a place where I was part of a community that inspired me. So it was, I won't say it was easy, but it was, I think it was necessary. Because, and I'd said this so often, if the dean can publish, well, then so can you. So then here at the GSB, I definitely want to thank one particular academic colleague, and that is John Louise, for being so supportive, for reminding me that there is a journal for every manuscript. And then dynamic women, definitely at the GSB, particularly our little team, Elspeth, Ailsa, Linda B, we really rocked. And then the gorgeous GSB girls, without a doubt, Claire, Anna, Khadija, and Mary, the magician. Yes. And then I do want to thank my previous boss, Liz Lange, who was wonderful to work with, a woman of great integrity. Another few thanks, hang in with me, guys. My wonderful, glorious, and oh so competent editor. Thank you, Sarah. I don't think I'd be able to publish without her input either. And people who've been collaborating with me, thank you very much. I'm a very difficult person to collaborate with. I set particularly high standards and short deadlines, and I know that is quite tricky to work with. I also want to thank online my high school principal, Victor Ritchie. Yes, sir, finally. Mr. Ritchie and I got to know each other because I spent so much time in detention. Okay. And I hope I've finally done you and Harold Cressy proud, sir. I really hope so. I also want to thank in advance and say thank you to the funny, engaging, and principled Nomusa Merkuba, who represents my humanities self, often overlooked because of my commerce self. Right? So thank you, Nomusa. And without a doubt, I want to end with thanking my students for always keeping me honest and for shaping me to be a better person. Okay, so why this topic? Some people have asked whether this is a story about me. No, it isn't, but it could be. Certainly, anyone who knows me, and definitely all the students who've been in this lecture theatre since the inception of the modular program in 2008 know about my little obsession with the construct of the psychological contract. And I, along with other collaborators, have explored it in many different contexts. The health sector, the wine industry, the NGO sector, the public sector, telecoms, engineering, media, the automotive industry, the financial services industry, manufacturing, consulting, and finally, we turn the gaze inwards to us here in academia. Okay, so what is this thing, the psychological contract? Because it's kind of, and I've explained it so many times, I feel I just need to press play. It really is, it looks at the employer-employee relationship in a way that extends beyond the written, beyond the formal contract. So it focuses on a couple of things: the mutual expectations between the parties to the relationship, the reciprocal exchange agreement between employer and employee, so there's a lot of reciprocity in this relationship, and it's reliant on the promises that are either implicit or explicit that have been made. So that's a little snapshot of it, okay. Then I thought what would be useful is to tell you about the two main kinds of psychological contracts. One is the transactional one, and one can simply understand that by its very name. It is there's a transactional nature to it. We rock up to work, we come and do what we paid to do, and the employer offers fairly limited involvement and a bit of training and development so that we're able to carry out our tasks. Neither party asks for more of the relationship. So it's quite, well, can be seen as a little soulless. But it's functioning because both parties are doing kind of the minimal that they need to do. Then on the other hand is the relational psychological contract, where the employee supports the organization, shows loyalty, shows organizational citizenship behaviors, and commitment to the goals of the organization. And the employer, on the other hand, supports the well-being and interests of the employee. So you can see, if you thought about it as a continuum, you'd go from one to the other. Of course, relational contracts take time to build because at the kind of heart of the psychological contract is trust. And you must see that each party is in fact delivering on their promises before you move to this feeling that we are in it together. Most of us end up in the middle somewhere, in a hybrid or balanced psychological contract, because the relational can't substitute the transactional. You know, I can't keep getting little pats on my back and not be paid appropriately. So we generally have both elements there. Then something else that you need to know about as far as the contract is concerned is that one can have breach of the psychological contract when, and I think important to remember is that many, if not most employees will experience some sort of breach or lack of fulfillment of their contract in terms of expectations that both parties might have regarding their employment. So during the course of the employment, there'll be some hiccup in your employment relationship, perhaps through this misalignment of expectations, or where trust may be broken, or the failure of the organization to fulfill one or more of its obligations to you. So the state of the psychological contract, I think, is a really good measure of whether employees are thriving or not. Okay, so some background, you know. I always say you can spot a South African academic anywhere. We say context is important. Then proceed to talk about that to such a degree that we don't get to what we want to say. So stick with me. So over the last 2 decades, I think structural changes in higher education have really impacted on the work life of the academic. More significantly, there's been a shift from universities providing elite education to mass education. And at the same time, managerialism has taken root within universities, affecting the way they operate. Now, I know this may be rather ironic coming from me, the previous dean, who, yes, definitely kind of had to enact some of those behaviors from time to time. But I think the rise of managerialism requires employees, and especially academics, to work and behave like corporate employees, accountable to measurable performance management targets. So consequently, academics have seen an increase in administrative requirements from both government and management, increasing academic workload and frustration. These changes, I think, have led also to an increase in the diversity of the academic role, with consequences for what used to be a singular academic identity. We knew who we were. This is what we are expected to do. Now we're responsible for obligations to our disciplines. We need to create knowledge. We need to teach well. We need to meet the demand for employable graduates. And we need to engage in entrepreneurial activities. They take advantage of profitable local and global market-related opportunities. These increased demands and shifts have had the effect of reducing the autonomy of academics. And taken together, managerialism and reduced autonomy have impacted negatively on the trust, the morale, and commitment of academics with respect to their institutions. So pertinent to our discussion today are the claims that academic institutions are gendered environments, and that universities governed by managerialist agendas strengthen rather than reduce inequalities along gendered lines. These gender differences have been found in the following: recruitment and selection processes, promotion practices, in the increasing demand of academic service to students, exhausting administrative and pastoral duties, and in the devaluing and underestimation of the academic endeavors of women. It has been argued that the managerialist agenda is a masculinist-dominated one, and has shaped the choices of women academics, compelling them to either accept it and therefore their lesser status, or embark on changing the status quo. So, who is this thing, the ideal academic, this narrow kind of idea of the academic identity? I think it continues to be seen as someone who has few interests or commitments outside of the academy. In this environment, academics have been obliged to spend extended periods at work, including taking substantial amounts of work home. As a result, domestic environments have been disrupted, causing women academics in particular, who are more often involved in the care of dependents, to suffer more adversely than their male colleagues. And if you think about our society, which is quite a patriarchal one, there's no way that society and societal trends don't also ooze their way into our institutions. So these views give rise to the focus today on the academic institution interface and what this might mean for women academics, who are frequently aware of gender challenges and must either find a workaround or be sidelined by the prevailing institutional culture. So that just sets our little backdrop to it. Okay. Let's talk a bit about the studies that examine the psychological contracts of academics. So, this being more generally, studies have shown, of course, that academics desire recognition and treatment as professionals and have expectations of being recognized for their commitment to the academic profession, the university, and their students. Research has also noted the role of responsible leadership in mediating the relationship between the perceptions of inclusion felt by academics and their psychological contract type. And studies in higher education show that, interestingly, transactional contracts were more prevalent amongst academics, and their expectations of university management were focused on the provision of a safe workplace, resources to conduct academic work, equal and competitive pay, and a reasonable workload. So it's quite, and this is, these studies have been, I would say, in the last 5 to 7 years. And it tells us that this immediate, current view that I'm going to discuss now is not something that has arisen from nothing. There's already been tension in the relationship where you perceive that academics don't expect any more in the workplace. Because if you look at all those components, none of them have anything to do with a feeling of belonging or commitment. And yet we look around us and we know many, many academics that definitely feel that way. So what is happening? So if you look at differences across gender in terms of psychological contract fulfillment, there have been many of those found in a variety of settings, such as the public sector, manufacturing, health in particular, and the service sector. But there's been a paucity of research with regards women academics globally and in South Africa. So I'm going to share the results of a study that addresses this issue. Okay. So these findings really present the lives of women academics during the pandemic. And I think the pandemic has been a wonderful thing that has happened. It sounds terrible, because it was an awful time, I think, for all of us. But what was wonderful about it is it brought many things sharply into focus. You could not hide anymore. I think leadership, for example, was completely on display during the pandemic. You got a sense immediately, was this a caring leader? Was this someone who was interested in you? Or were they more perfunctory? I don't think people could hide, in fact, even though they attempted to hide in those Zoom meetings. So the findings of the study show something really quite interesting and quite disturbing. The findings show a strong inclination towards a transitional psychological contract type. This is a very odd type to see in a work relationship. It's very odd. If one can imagine relational, transactional, here's transitional. The relationship is starting to break down between the parties. It's an employment relationship that's eroding. And in this case, of course, between women academics and the institutions. It's less, in fact, of a psychological contract because it's so far to the left. But it's more of a cognitive state that people have. And typically happens during organizational transition and change. This is the least stable of all contract types and is characterized by highly ambiguous expectations. This contract typically arises when the employee has reservations about the motives and objectives of the employer and is maintained when employees continue to receive confusing organizational signals. So, let me let you calm down slightly. The women academics in the study come from all 26 universities and not particularly this one. So how is this transitional PC seen in the data? There were numerous examples of breach. For example, through shifts in conditions and job expectations, through an increase in workload and pressure, perceptions of a lack of appreciation and care, low levels of trust and support, and the negative, almost overlooked impact on academic well-being. Women academics in middle management roles weren't exempt either, expressing frustration, exhaustion, and feelings of being overwhelmed. That particularly alarming if one thinks about the trickle-down effect that might occur. If you're managing others and you're not feeling strong enough, how are you able to hold it all together? And there were definite examples of increased managerialism, big focus on organizational policies, daily reporting, increased meetings, a focus on the financial bottom line, and the like. Thus, it appears that beyond the low influence and lack of shared governance already present, a further erosion of academic autonomy is taking place. Let me have some water. I thought what would be good would be to share with you some of the extracts from the data so you could have a sense of how people were feeling. There could be so many ways in which the university could have lightened its load on academics. But endless demand for reporting, surveys, routine business as normal things like school evaluation reports continued as normal. Monthly meetings now needed weekly, and I spend hours every day in admin and management meetings that are really reporting meetings. Another said, the university management did not send the information that was sent out to the students to the lecturers also, as if the lecturers do not need to know that. However, when the students have problems, they actually turn to us as lecturers, and if we are not informed, then it takes us extra time to find out how they can be helped. One said, the institutional message included an explicit reference to the institutional disciplinary code and procedures. The implied message is that if you don't sustain a high level of academic productivity despite the lockdown, you will be disciplined. Such messages makes the institutional commitment to staff well-being and the money spent on it null and void, and flies in the face of an ethic of care. I think we can all identify with the next one. I feel bombarded with too many invitations to training for Teams, Moodle, other support, and repetitive requests for reporting on various aspects of work. It's as if management imagine that we are not gainfully employed during this time and feel the need to constantly chivvy us. One said, I feel very let down by my university. I ended my face-to-face lectures on the Friday and was expected to miraculously move everything online with no data, no laptop, and no support the following week. It feels like management is always asking more and more from us and offering nothing in return. I often felt like resigning, and I did feel unsupported. I see this lack of communication and clarity in guidance as a fail in leadership, and I actually carry some resentment towards the management of my university for not performing this very important task of leadership. That is, reaching out to employees, keeping an open line of communication, leaving us confused during this crisis. I have definitely much less faith in our management than I had before the lockdown. Then, from an HOD, the constantly changing environment and the emotional toll of being a head of department has been overwhelming. It means I need to support and help staff in the department where support from my managers are missing, as they're probably running around attending to more important matters than their middle management. And I think there were two quotes that really kind of summed up the experiences of women academics for me. So they're just a little longer. Bear with me. The lockdown has emphasized for me how out of kilter my faculty and institutional leadership and managers are with the realities of their broader workforce, particularly that of women. The running narrative within my faculty has been centered around that working from home is a luxury and a privilege, as you're supposed to have more time, not having to travel to and from work, and as a result, you are supposed to be academically more productive. Those in powerful positions do not have small children. And I mean, Sue, you alluded to this earlier, the fact that during this pandemic period, that research productivity of women academics really fell worldwide, and I'm sure this is true too of South Africa. And then this one, which really kind of gets to me, this quote from an established professor with older children, okay? She said, you have to be the emotional rock for everyone and meet the demands of work. And in the end, your tank is running on empty. But you must smile. You cannot debrief yourself from work on your way home so that you can nurture your family. Work and home life are blended, and neither is getting the attention it needs. Your family asks you why you are grumpy all the time, because the new normal is not normal at all. The uncertainty is psychologically taxing, and this affects home life and work life. So should we be concerned about these findings? Should we? I think the effects of a lack of fulfillment of the psychological contract are not to be underestimated. In particular, the breach of the psychological contract, I think, can be considered a disruptive signal and is likely to prompt negative reactions. These include disconnection and disengagement, lower trust, reduced job satisfaction, and an increase in organizational cynicism and counterproductive work behaviors. If we acknowledge that work-life merge is expected to carry on indefinitely in higher education, universities need to be aware of and act on its adverse impact on the emotional well-being of women academics. Because I think these impacts have severe implications for their partners, for their families, for their students, for their colleagues, for the work itself, and definitely on their own personal well-being. So, you should know I wouldn't ever leave it there. So, we asked this question, are women academics surviving or are they thriving? If we understand the definition of thriving to be the psychological state in which individuals experience both a sense of vitality and a sense of learning at work, where vitality refers to the positive experience of having energy available, and learning refers to the sense that one is acquiring and applying knowledge and skills. It's a state of being enthusiastic, of feeling valued, feeling what you do is valuable. It's not feeling overwhelmed or depleted. It is not experiencing feelings of meaninglessness, of hopelessness, and a lack of self-efficacy in our lives. So sadly, I conclude that women academics aren't thriving. They're surviving. And if you see little pockets of thriving, that is because people are really drawing on their innermost resources to keep it going. One of the most interesting things in the study that we did not look at all was that, and that came through really clearly, is that the psychological contract between women academics and their students remained strong. People were talking to their students at 2 o'clock in the morning. They were using their own data. They were sending money to students. So that is intact. And I think we need to keep in mind that we can only use that connection to the students and misuse it in our academics. It'll only go so far. You can, right? Because that's what gets people up and gets people going in the morning, is wanting to make a difference in someone else's life, and those people are our students. So where and how must things shift? So of course we know that universities need both male and female academics to produce intellectuals. We are not sidelining you in this, but women, I think, need more deliberate support in practical and tangible ways. And if you add race and age in terms of younger academics to that, there's much, much work to be done. When a sense of value in the relationship between an academic and the institution permeates that employment relationship, individuals are likely to experience not only a sense of self-worth, but have a belief in the processes and practices being fair. This is because a sense of trust has been created. So, from a leadership perspective, addressing the issue requires more than just a verbal exchange, but a more substantive, active response and co-created organizational reform, a true collaboration, especially to repair employee trust and avoid the quiet quitting syndrome. Are you reading about that now? I used to call it presenteeism before, when people are there, but they're not there. And that's what we're having with quiet quitting, especially in a country like ours, where we have such awful unemployment. People can't leave to go somewhere else. So they stay, no matter their levels of unhappiness. And dealing with that in any leadership position is a very, very tricky thing. So, before, I think it was much easier. When people were unhappy, they left. And then perhaps, well, the rest of us might have been happier. But both parties were then happy. Both parties were happy. But quiet quitting is particularly problematic. Even in the Great Resignation, which is something I've also been looking at now, I never thought we'd see any of those trends, because why would we have that? Why would people be resigning? But I think during the pandemic, people had a moment to reflect and say, is this what I want out of life? So in a survey of, let me see, just under 700,000, 8% were academics that were leaving. They were leaving because of, due to a variety of reasons, some of which dovetailed really nicely with what I've outlined here for you. So I think we need to ensure a couple of things. We need to ensure that we don't have and we don't create an enabling environment for toxic leadership to flourish. To ensure that something that's been called the Toxic Five, a term coined by Sully and colleagues, the Toxic Five behaviors: disrespect, non-inclusive, unethical, cutthroat, abusive. We need to be sure that that has no place in the academic world. Self-awareness, compassion, empathy, vulnerability, and agility are essential leadership characteristics to navigate through any crisis, and I would consider those complete non-negotiables for academic leadership. We need responsible and responsive senior leaders to deal with our serious challenge of the surviving woman academic within our academies. Do we have those kind of leaders? I'll leave you to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ronnie, for that intriguing lecture, and so much for us to take out of it, feeling a little bit vulnerable being in the university leadership here, but I'll come and get some more tips from you later on. Yes, certainly lots of takeaways, and such an important subject if we really are going to go to where we want to as a university and as an academic community. I'm going to hand over now to Associate Professor Nomusa Makuba to deliver the formal vote of thanks. Thanks, Nomusa.
So I'm now no longer so sure if I can do justice to the task at hand. Linda, I must say, when you called me, I was really surprised. And I think this is I absolutely did not expect that you would ask me to do this. So I cannot tell you what an absolute pleasure it is to have this opportunity to congratulate you on this platform, not in an email, but here, and to have had the opportunity to engage with your research. And I mean, I think for me, where our paths crossed, institutional transformation is something that has been particularly close to my heart. I have over almost a decade having put in work towards institutional transformation. And there's just so much resonance in what you've presented and the experiences I've witnessed, some with you, over the years. Joining the professoriate is a long and arduous journey, and doing that as a woman and as a person of color, and I've just learned you're the first one in the faculty, which I didn't realize until this evening, is even more incredible. So this is a proud moment in recognition of your contributions to scholarship. So yes, I am exhilarated, as I was when you called. So I wanted to begin by invoking the late feminist scholar Bell Hooks, who says, "Knowledge rooted in experience shapes what we value, and as a consequence, how we know what we know, as well as how we use what we know. And she argued that there must exist a paradigm, a practical model for social change that includes an understanding of ways to transform consciousness that are linked to efforts to transform structures. So for me, this is where the treasure of this research, of your research, lies, and the significance of the message delivered this evening. It's how these experiences reveal the kinds of value systems through which the structural organization of work is realized. So at one point or another, we experienced, but we also bear witness to the struggles of women as they play multiple roles in the university, at home, and society at large. So the challenge then is to take what these experiences are telling us seriously and courageously, and by doing so, uncloak what the feminist scholar Sarah Ahmed calls the phenomenology of the institution. So in other words, these experiences, sometimes when we hear them, they sound like complaints in everyday discourse when people are talking. I'm tired. I can't do this anymore. There's a particular register in it. It sounds like complaint, and this is what Sarah Ahmed writes about. But she also says that the nature of that complaint does something, it transforms something in that person who's going through that experience. It enables them to see something different. It's like a veil has been lifted and you're able to see the institution in all its nakedness. So it can be a way of apprehending what is around you. So we're in the process of experiencing something or witness someone experience the disillusionment when the breach occurs. There's so much that appears that would otherwise not appear. And so in some ways we gain a capacity to explain something. And I mean, as you were talking, it's sometimes, I mean, we get people who come and say, I feel it, but I don't know how to put it into words. And if something changes, and one then is able to see the machinery beyond the facade. So locating these experiences within the context of the psychological contract is key, because it draws our attention to the expectations that are developed over time, and this is something you've alluded to. And it is here that we begin to see and realize the misalignment of value systems and how intellectual labor is being repositioned within ever precarious neoliberal institutions. So for me, the question of temporality is important, this question of time, and I think you've mentioned this. The psychological contract is established over time and is often a differentiating mechanism within institutions. So not only in terms of hierarchies, but also, Linda, as you've pointed out, in terms of gender and race. So there are expectations that are accumulated over centuries and are the ferment of institutional cultures that have always excluded women and people of color. Then there are expectations that have been established in the past few decades for institutions to be altered altogether, to be more socially and politically accountable than they previously were. So in times of crisis, it would seem that the transition between the expectation and its manifestation as reality is compressed. And it impacts on men, women, and gender non-binary people differently. And this is where we notice that there's differentiated manner in which rules are applied. And I think here, again, I draw on Sarah Ahmed, where she says, within an organization or an institution, there's a gap between words and deeds, between what organizations say they will do and what they're committed to doing and what they are actually doing. So the COVID-19 pandemic as a temporal frame for this research is particularly interesting in that it's a way to see what was already existing in a slow crisis, which we couldn't see because the unmasking of one value system parading as another is often so slow that the illusion is held in place. And the shifts between the reciprocal and the exploitative work relations remain almost unnoticeable. So by compressing time, the pandemic stripped the illusion, leaving the bare truth of inequitable division of labor within universities and at home bare. It uncloaked the real cost of social reproduction, especially on women. And this is something that Alessandra Mezzandri would have referred to as the impact of the COVID-19 as something that is a systemic crisis of social reproduction. But not only is there a question of temporality to understanding the psychological contract and gender in the context of institutional crisis, but there's also a spatial one, which is probably a much more complicated one. As institutions began encroaching into home spaces for which they pay no rent, this has unearthed a myriad of other spatial politics that I think, if left unattended, will eventually lead to the collapse or maybe the irrelevance of universities. It's not only that university work was happening at home during that time. This is something that has always been happening. But it's that the neglect of the support system of domestic workers, care workers, teachers, etc., that makes it possible became visible. The women who make it possible for academic women to survive in this system is something that became a much more sort of clearer question. And all the women who make it possible and have made it possible for men to thrive in this system became something that was crystal clear. So it shows an overlooked care economy that makes university work possible. In essence, the stability of the university, the social and psychological contract, is not only to its employees, but to a society, that sustains the conditions under which employees can actually arrive at work, can function as human beings once they are at work, and develop and maintain working relationships amongst each other with students and multiple communities that constitute it. So considering that our homes reflect the spatial planning of apartheid, the demands of work could not have been the same. It needs not to be repeated that the expectations from academics and from staff is that they perform, even under crisis, almost exactly in the same way, that respond in the same way. The assumption is that a majority of us should be residing near the university, in well-serviced areas, in homes with enough space to work, and whether by choice or circumstance, class-differentiated and gendered home situations mean that the imposition of the university, not only during COVID times, in those homes is based on a contract of disproportionate expectations. So for me, this is the crux of the matter. Addressing the value systems upon which institutions are built and upon which the structural organization of work is transfigured. What is important about Linda's work is not only the impact that the breach that the breach of the psychological contract will have in the long run, and how crucial it will be in terms of rebuilding the trust that holds it all together, but that in the context of mass disillusionment, there will be a need to reevaluate the value systems that we espouse. So currently, there's a value system based on the cult of measurement, and I think this is something you also pointed to, numbers and publications, ratings, rankings. But what do we value as scholars? And to whom are we accountable in the end? What will be the real meaning of our work and the relationships we build and maintain? How do we ensure that in everything we do, we work to change the spatial and temporal conditions that reproduce the gendered and racialized working relations? How do we challenge the relentless commodification of knowledge and democratize the university in its relations with society at large? With this, again, as I close, I'm reminded of Bell Hooks' point that to build community requires vigilant awareness of the work we must continually do to undermine all the socialization that leads us to behave in ways that perpetuate domination. Her position was that justice demands integrity, and it's to have a moral universe, not only to know what is right and wrong, but to put things in perspective, to weigh things. So justice is different from violence and retribution and requires that complex accounting. So today, as I said, I'm very, very, very grateful. I'm deeply grateful to be learning from your work, to be learning from your research, which will be important as we think about the impending changes in academic work that may be facing us in future. Thank you and congratulations. And I also wish to thank all my colleagues here in front and all the colleagues who have taken time out to be here today.
So thank you very much, Associate Professor Makuba. What a wonderful vote of thanks. And aren't we looking forward to her inaugural lecture? So with that, we end our proceedings for tonight. Congratulations again to Professor Ronnie. Please, we'll move out of the room, and there's food and drinks outside, and please do spend some time celebrating with us. Thank you.